Nathaniel's eyes opened. His vision flared as the piercing light of dawn penetrated his pupils. The world was upside down. He could see the road they travelled on, which eventually fell away into a blue and orange sky. He realized he was lying on his back and his head had been dangling off the cart. He tried to sit up, but a bolt of pain exploded from the back of his neck, shooting down his spine. His unconscious position hadn't done him any favours, and his limbs were exhausted. With bound hands and feet, he'd awkwardly pushed himself into a sitting position. Across from him, Liam was still knocked out. It was a miracle that the kid was breathing at all after all he'd been through. Straining against his stiff neck, he looked around. Men flanked both sides of the cart, and none of them paid him any attention. They were dressed in green, and they had the look of mercenaries about them. Nathaniel had a knack for knowing mercs when he saw them. Gunners, he thought. The men were spread out, most of them walking in positions which gave them a view over the surrounding land. The cart which followed behind theirs must have been valuable, as the gunners had no intention of letting any outside forces get within 10 yards of the thing. In the distance, the winding road converged with a huge building. This place was ridiculously well guarded, with sentry turrets, spotlights, and countless armed men guarding the exterior. Nathaniel would have guessed that that was their destination. Liam let out a muffled groan and opened his eyes. His anger seemed to be tamed, at least for now. They had bigger things to worry about. What happened? Liam mumbled, squinting to see through the morning sunlight. Gunners, Nathaniel whispered. I've no idea what they want with us, but they didn't kill us, so that's gotta mean something. Well, Liam suppressed a wheeze. He was going to recover, but his torso had taken a beating. How do we get away? As much as I hate to say it, we can't fight our way out of this. We have no weapons, and you aren't going to contribute much in a fistfight. Nathaniel checked to see he wasn't being watched and carefully reached over to Liam's neck. He unhooked Liam's Brotherhood dog tags and lowered them off the side of the cart. It might not do much, but hopefully Alan or Amy will find these. The two of them cut their conversation short as they closed in on the gunners' headquarters. The cart stopped before the entrance to the building, and two gunners pulled Nathaniel off the cart and to his feet. When two more attempted to do the same for Liam, he collapsed to the ground. One gunner took this as an act of rebellion and slammed Liam in the groin with his boot. Liam retched in pain. If he'd had anything in his stomach, it would have surely come up then. They pulled him back to his feet and belligerently supported him on their shoulders. Half led and half dragged, they were escorted through the compound and thrown into adjacent cells in a cold and otherwise empty room. When the door to the room was shut, the room fell into almost complete darkness. The only light came from a dust-stained window on the wall between their cages. I'm getting tired of you messing me around, Carmine spoke in a calm tone, but as he cut the head off his cigar, his eyes were full of malice. Amy fidgeted in her chair. Carmine, she started, you have to trust us. We have a huge shipment worth the sum of the caps we owe you and more. There'll be interest. You came all the way to Bunker Hill with your cargo, yet when you arrived in the town, you were empty-handed. Carmine lit up and sucked in, causing the cigar to burn bright in the dark room. Do you seriously expect me to believe this crap? You were fleeing and you thought I wouldn't find you. Please, Amy pleaded. Me, Dutch, and a new guy I hired acquired a stockpile of mini-nukes from a group of gunners. We had a contact here in Bunker Hill to buy the goods, but some complications arose and now the nukes are back in the hands of the gunners. With your help and trust, we can get the cargo back. It's only a half-day's walk from here. Carmine's stoic expression vanished and he threw his head back in laughter. The armed men surrounding them all proceeded to chuckle softly, following their boss's lead. You two managed to steal from the gunners. I know those money-grubbing pricks, and they wouldn't take cargo that precious out on the streets without one hell of an escort. Well, I know how to pick my business associates. I guess because my guy managed to dispatch all of them with his sniper rifle, Amy said. Carmine paused in thought for a moment, taking 3 drawn-out puffs from his cigar. What's more, I can prove it. Amy gestured to Dutch's travel sack, which he held with the care a mother would hold a baby. We encountered some trouble on the road, so I sent Dutch on ahead with a token of our goodwill. Amy nodded to Dutch, and he carefully opened the sack. Carmine glanced in, and his eyes widened. Well, I'll be damned. Carmine grinned, holding his cigar between his teeth. I'm glad we didn't start shooting, because this would have turned Bunker Hill into a ditch. He waved at a nearby guard who reached out to take the pack off Dutch. Dutch held onto the sack firmly until Amy gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Alright, sweetheart, you've got yourself a deal. We'll join you in picking up these nukes, but I'll take the full debt with 25% interest and enough caps to buy whatever ammo we use cleaning up your mess." That would leave Amy with basically nothing, but as she looked around at the gun still pointed in her direction, she wasn't going to start bartering. "Sounds good." Carmine grinned again. "One more thing," he said. "How exactly did you know a gunner escort was going down?" Amy smiled back a devious smile, trying to appear cunning. "I have my connections too. One of my informers told me about the shipment, and I wanted it, so I took it." Carmine didn't probe any further, and Amy hadn't exactly lied. In reality, she'd gotten further in debt acquiring the knowledge of the gunner trade routes from a shady individual in the alleyways of Goodneighbor, but what Carmine didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Amy and Dutch led Carmine and his 24 triggermen out of Bunker Hill's front gate as the sun reached its peak in the sky, and then she took them back the way she'd come, praying Liam and Nathaniel's trail would be easy to follow. 6 gunners entered the room. Clearly, they weren't underestimating their captives. They unlocked the cages and dragged Nathaniel and Liam into the middle of the room. 2 more gunners followed, carrying a steel chair. The chairs were placed a few meters apart, and Nathaniel and Liam were seated with their hands bound behind their backs. Nathaniel's mind was hazy. He was trying to figure out what the gunners wanted with them. The interrogation that was being orchestrated now only proved to Nathaniel's thought. We know something they want to know. But what in the fuck could be worth all of this? The steel chair gave Nathaniel's back no relief. He hadn't been able to keep track of how many hours they'd been left to stew in their cells, but it was beginning to take its toll on his back. Once they were in place, the gunners lined up against the wall, 4 on each side, and the 2 captives were left to stare at an empty doorway. Liam was still too delirious to pay attention to what was going on, but Nathaniel knew something was about to go down. The sound of heavy footfalls began resonating up the hallway, and a huge man appeared in front of them. He ducked under the doorway and gestured for his men to leave the room. The man was the size of Nathaniel in his power armor, and his thick-muscled arms were covered in gunner tattoos under a layer of coarse black hair. When all 8 of the men left the room, the man closed the door behind them, bolting it shut from the inside. He then began examining his prisoners. The man's face was divided by heavy lines of age, and his skin seemed almost leathery around his dark brown eyes. He seemed entertained by Liam's unconscious state, and then he pulled a small bag from the pocket of his fatigues. He tapped the rim over his hands, and a small mound of white powder formed on his palm. He walked over to where Liam sat, lifted his head, and blew the powder in Liam's face. Liam suddenly burst to life, his eyes shot open, and he coughed uncontrollably, inhaling more of the substance in the process. The man leaned down to Liam's eye level, and a sickly smirk spread across his face. As he did, the lines around his mouth deepened. "You don't get to sleep through this," he said, holding Liam's face up with his other hand. "What is the—" Nathaniel's words were cut off as the back of the man's clenched fist slammed him across the cheek. Nathaniel felt blood pour onto his tongue from where his teeth had lacerated his inner cheek. "Oh no," the man cut in. No. The man's amusement made Nathaniel's stomach turn. "You speak when I tell you to. Do you have any idea how lucky you 2 fucks are? What's happening right here is unprecedented. Never in gunner history has Commander Eckhart allowed an enemy to live. No. I don't waste my food on scum like you for nothing. You should thank God I reclaimed my cargo unharmed. Torture isn't really my style, you see, but I'm going to get what I want, and you're both going to thank me for every breath you take as my captives." Eckhart began stretching the fingers on his large hands and massaging the knuckles of the fist which had struck Nathaniel. He paced the length of the room as he did. "Now," he continued, "do not waste my time. You know why you're here, and I want answers." He stopped pacing and looked at them expectantly. Liam and Nathaniel shared a glance, neither knowing what to say to the maniac. Nathaniel could feel his heart pound in his chest. He licked the cuts in his mouth. A few moments of silence passed between the 3 men, and in their cold metal chairs they waited for what came next. Eckhart bounced on his heels like an excited child. In any other circumstance, Nathaniel would have found it comical. This beast of a man, his size only rivaled by his insanity, grinning and springing on the soles of his military boots. But he didn't find it comical. Instead, he found that very boot barreling into his chest. The sole of his boot cracked against Nathaniel's ribs and sent him and his chair toppling backwards. He cried out in agony, unable to move, like a turtle on his back. And then as he stared up at the broken panels of the ceiling, he heard punches. Eckhart's fist crunched into Liam's nose, and the force of the blow caused Liam to rock back, only just stopping before it toppled to the ground. Eckhart walked around to Nathaniel's side, and using his toe lifted Nathaniel and his chair to land back upright. Nathaniel's vision was swaying. He blinked hard to stabilize the world around him until Eckhart came back into focus. "You fucking morons," Eckhart said. "Don't you get it? If you don't speak, I will beat you within an inch of your lives. And then you'll speak. Mark my fucking words, you will. How did you learn of our trade routes? Don't expect me to believe you stumbled across our mini-nukes and killed our escort on a whim." Nathaniel looked over at Liam, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. "I swear to you," Nathaniel said, spitting blood as he started. "We have no idea what you're talking about. I'm no merchant, and he's a mercenary. That's it. We don't deal with information like that." "That's not what I want to hear," Eckhart said, suddenly calm and measured. "I told you." The smile was tugging on the corner of his mouth. "I told you I'm going to get what I want, and you're both going to tell me." Eckhart shook out his right hand once again and started pacing toward them. And then a knock came at the door. Eckhart stopped, turned on his heels, and opened the door. "This better be good, soldier." "Sniper fire, sir," the gunner said. "From the ridge." "How many?" "About 20, sir." Eckhart turned to face Nathaniel and Liam with anger clear on his face. "Throw them back in their cells." "Liam," Nathaniel said, keeping his voice low despite the commotion outside. Liam's head was swaying back and forth, but his eyes were open. "Listen to me." Liam looked up at Nathaniel. "Whatever's going on out there is the reason we're still alive. We have to escape." Liam held Nathaniel's eyes, but his gaze was full of resentment and defeat. "I'll never be able to express how sorry I am for what happened when I was with the Enclave. Hell, I still haven't forgiven myself. I doubt I ever will. But if you'll help me and fight back against these fuckers, you'll at least live long enough to resent me more tomorrow." Liam remained unmoving for a long moment, and then he nodded. "How do we get out?" Liam asked. "I can't say I was ever a master lockpicker. For all that, I was never a thief. But I do have this." Nathaniel opened the palm of his hand, and in it lay a splinter of metal, crude but close enough in the shape of a bobby pin that it may be able to trigger the mechanism. When my chair hit the ground, a piece of steel broke off under my weight. Shame it wasn't big enough to bury in Eckhart's throat. Nathaniel backed up against the cage door and started picking with his bound hands. Outside, the noises were abundant. He could hear gunfire outside the compound. Common assault rifles mostly, and what sounds like submachine guns. Those guns were the go-to choice for triggermen in Nathaniel's experience. His thought was cut short by the sound of a prominent click in cage lock. He pushed his weight against the door and it swung open. He quickly backtracked over to Liam's cage. He couldn't help but think there was no way this splinter would hold long enough to open another cage, but he wasn't about to voice his concern to the broken man behind him. He reached his bound hands through the bar of Liam's cage. "Quick, untie me!" Liam awkwardly pulled at the rope around Nathaniel's wrists, and soon he was free to move. With his hands back in front of him, Nathaniel started picking the lock to Liam's cell. He could feel the tumbler inside the lock and started applying force. Then he heard a click and his heart sank. The splinter snapped inside the lock. Before Nathaniel could curse, a gunner opened the door. "Freeze!" the gunner cried as he raised his gun. Nathaniel dove forward, rolled, and picked up the nearest chair and flung it at the guard. It slammed into the gunner's torso and his right arm, sending the rifle in his hand flying across the room. Before the chair had even hit the ground, Nathaniel had closed the distance. He gripped the gunner's exposed neck, raising him off his feet, and then he slammed him into the doorframe. He tightened his grip as the gunner's face turned purple. He writhed in panic, thrashing more and more intensely, and then he stopped still. Nathaniel let go of the gunner's neck, and his lifeless body fell in a heap to the ground. He strode across the room and picked up the dropped assault rifle, checking the magazine. "Step back," Nathaniel said, aiming the rifle at the cage's lock. Liam moved away, and Nathaniel fired a single round. The lock shattered and the door opened. "That will likely get someone's attention, so let's find our gear and get the fuck out of here."